my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon, and I am a relationship expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news or social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Brett Harley, and we're going to talk about a very unexpected DNA journey. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Sophie.
Tell us a bit about yourself, please.
I'm a restorative justice officer with Hampshire Youth Offending Team. I come from Gosport. I've had many different jobs, and I'm kind of married, no children.
So before we got on to the subject, I'll give a bit of background for the purpose of the exercise, really, about how we met, which I was trying to think about it earlier, and I should know because it was your stepfather being diagnosed with cancer and dying, which actually was one of the events that led to me giving up smoking. And I think, was it 2011?
Yeah, well, he passed in 2010, so he was diagnosed in the 2009, the end of, and then he sadly passed in the September
2010. Yeah. So I was at the time his manager, and he was one of the favourite guys I had. His dry sense of humour, just bluntness at times. I really got on with him.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to go and see him when he was ill, and then actually really got on with your mum and carried on going to see her.
Yeah, which was nice. Mum obviously thought the world of you, so it was lovely, and so did Eric as well, obviously.
Yeah, so that's how we kind of originally met, and then we just your mum passed away in 2015, and then we just kind of Facebook friends, really keep in touch without, you just see what the other people are up to, sort of thing.
That's
so
right.
Your mum was adopted, which I remember her telling me the story, and was it she came from Burton or went to Burton, or I can't really remember.
Burton. So she was actually brought up in Malvern, but
That's it.
But actually, that's where she was kind of raised from the age of 5. But she was born in a place called Stourbridge, which is just outside of Birmingham.
Yeah, that's it. And obviously, because she was adopted and you're actually estranged from your brother and your dad, you started the DNA journey. So talk us a little bit through that.
So obviously, as you say, Mum passed, and she passed not knowing who her biological father was. She had a name for her biological mum, and I believe she met her a couple of times in her youth, but other than that, they had no contact, which is sad. And I felt that it would be nice to try and fill out some of those blanks for my mum. So I went and contacted Worcestershire's adoption service to see if I could gain any access to information that could help me with my search for answers. And they quite rightly told me to get in touch with my local adoption agency so they could talk between the social workers there for obviously safeguarding reasons. So that's what I done. I started that process, I would say, around about 2 years ago. And because of COVID, it took a long time for the transcript to come down because it was recorded on a thing called microfiche, which is like a film that needed to be kind of read and recorded and sent back. There was a backlog. Obviously, COVID affected everything, and I finally got some results towards the beginning of last year, which kind of explained why my mum was adopted and the story. And very quickly, it was sadly because her mum had epilepsy, and back in 1949 they considered that a big problem, and they didn't know enough about it. So she was
it's quite sad, really.
Yeah, it is very sad because obviously she was kept my poor nan was kept in an insane asylum, a very experimental hospital called Poet Hospital, where they use things like electric therapy, so like electric shock therapy and quite high doses of LSD for their patients, and it's quite disturbing. I've seen a documentary around that time of what Poet was like, and it was just awful. So
Doesn't
very sad.
sound, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't good. So I found from the adoption agency, I've got an intermediary to kind of do some research with the information after signing a non-disclosure agreement. They had access to the full record, whereas I didn't. But they came back to say that there was sadly no other children of, that my nan had, just my mum, and that she sadly passed away in the early 90s. But they did have a list of siblings of my nan, and one of the sisters had quite a unique middle name combination, and through that on Ancestry I was able to locate her and a marriage certificate, and through her husband I managed to find an obituary with children and grandchildren listed on there, and I was able then to track them down on Facebook and contact. So my first kind of discovery really was my mum's first cousins and their children, which was lovely, and I've since met loads of them. That was really, really lovely, and I spent a weekend up kind of Stourbridge Way meeting everybody, and it was really, really nice. And it was another link to my past, and very like-minded people, similar interests in music, which was really nice after all these years to find that out. And it turned out that my nanny Edith, my mum's biological mother, was a lovely woman, enjoyed her sports. She was really caring, really sweet to the younger children. And it's sad because it sounded like my mum and her could have done with each other in their lives. And I've got photos of my nan when she was young, and she looks like mum when she was young. So it's sad. But one bonus I did find out on the ancestry DNA was that my mum was actually raised by a couple called Oliver and Ivy Habgood, and Oliver turned out to be a distant cousin of my mum's, but neither of them. So although she was adopted from 5
she
onwards,
was kind of stealing the family, unknowingly.
So that's lovely, but it's just a shame that they didn't know. But I know my mum adored him. She used to describe him as the Sergeant Wilson from Dad's Army, John. Right. So, I never met him. He passed 2 years before I was born, but he sounded like a lovely man. And yeah, it's been nice. But then my other part of the DNA journey, and the reason why I submitted my DNA to Ancestry, was just to kind of discover if there was any other kind of family members out there that I could reach out to find out who my mum's dad was. So I'd done that, and the results came back, and I was quite shocked because I was raised by a guy who should have had or would have German blood within their DNA profile. Because I'd already done a family tree for that family. And although I've been estranged from him since I was 29, I was very aware that there was a German connection from the kind of mid-19th century where a German...
And it's something that you just know, don't you? Like, you've still been, like, with him for all that time. It's something that, when it's so obvious, you just know about it.
So yeah, exactly. So so when I got my DNA profile built up of all my different nationalities and different percentages of those nationalities, Germanic Europe was not part of that makeup. And that was my first kind of alarm bell, but I didn't look into it too much at the time. It was only more recently that I looked into it more because I thought maybe I'm not understanding something. Maybe, I don't know, that there's some sort of technical issue.
And obviously, because you're estranged from your dad, you couldn't really ask him any questions either.
No. So then I thought, well, I need to, I've got a hunch that something's not right here, but I need to kind of get out and see what else I can do to either confirm or prove that it isn't right. So I searched. I've got around about 16 to 17,000 DNA matches through this service, and obviously the vast majority of them are distant cousins. And I search. You can search by name So I searched the surname, which was a German surname, and none came up out of all of those matches. So that was my second part of firming up my belief that this man actually wasn't my father. And then the final one was when I'd done my family tree of that family. I'd noticed there was quite a active member of Ancestry that should have been my third cousin. And when I clicked on her profile, it said either you're not a DNA match or they've not done a DNA test. So I messaged this lady, explained my situation, and asked if she'd done the DNA test. And she, on the 11th of December, she came back to me and confirmed that she had done the test. And unfortunately, we weren't a match. So that was three kind of different angles I'd looked at to try and get a definitive answer.
How were you feeling at that point? Because in a way, kind of like your life has been a lie.
Yeah, very much so. And that's, I mean, I had obviously a lot of questions, and with mum obviously passing in 2015, and me being estranged from the man I thought was my father, I was obviously stunned, shocked, hurt, angry, and it's kind of been emotional kind of roller coaster of up and down, kind of taking things from my mum's perspective, speaking to one of her good friends from the time as well to try and get my head around it and see if she'd heard of anybody who could have been my father, or if my mum had confided in her. And she's a lovely lady as well, and she would have told me the truth, and she said she hadn't been confided in. She had no idea, sadly, who my father could be if it wasn't the man she knows and she believed it was as well. I also spoke to my estranged father's half brother, who I do have contact with, asked him if he knew, and again, he didn't know either. So there was a lot of mystery.
Just out of interest, if you spoke to your half brother, because that was one of the questions I had, are you going to tell your dad? Does your dad know? Because that must be a bit of a shock for him too.
Well, so the day after I discovered that this man wasn't my father, I emailed him and explained the results from Ancestry proving that he wasn't my father, and asking him if he knew.
Yeah.
And then I said also I felt he had the right to know if he didn't know.
Right.
And he's never replied.
Right. But okay. Fair enough.
I know that I'm still in touch with my brother. Well, my now half brother. He's not actually my full brother.
Yeah.
I'm still in touch with his eldest son, my nephew Josh, and I've told him I've no doubt that it gets back to my estranged father through.
It's not something you're going to keep quiet about, is it?
No, there's a couple of avenues. I felt he had the right to know, obviously.
His choice not to want to contact you back, but I think it's a bit silly, to be fair.
Well, that's the measure of the man, I think, that you can't even offer a word of confirmation or denial or anything, just nothing. And the backstory kind of explains, I believe, a lot of my upbringing, where I felt very much treated differently from my older half-brother, who I thought was my full brother, by my estranged father and his side of the family, very much so, like stuff that you wouldn't believe. It's sad, really.
I'm going to say something a bit silly here, maybe, but is it like animals where he sensed something was amiss?
Well, you might speculate that until I tell you.
Okay.
Some really interesting information.
The weighted breath here.
Bated breath for the next part of the story. So basically, I channeled my kind of energy, because I couldn't focus on work or anything like that at the time of initial discovery. It was obviously a major kind of life moment for me. So I ended up kind of channeling all of that kind of thought into trying to discover who my real father was. And I'd kind of done some research. I'd very naively got a notepad and pen out and went, right, I'm going to go and work out who my dad is tonight. I've got access to all my DNA hits and everything else. I'll work it out. But it's hugely complex, and it's a massive disrespect to genealogists to think you're just going to rock up with no knowledge and solve it in a day. What I had seen is a YouTube video where a lady had used a Facebook page called DNA Detectives, and basically this place. They've got a UK version as well. They've got amateur genealogists, people that have obviously
An
discovered their own
interest.
stories, and they've got
Yeah.
a big interest, good knowledge, and perhaps using this to kind of gain experience to become professionals in this. So you can reach out, and they call them angels, and you can reach out to ask for help in searching for your parents. And they prioritize people searching for their parents rather than, say, an uncle or a grandfather.
Yeah, yeah.
So I put a post up, and this was early on the Saturday evening. By 2 hours later, I'd already had 3 or 4 people reach out to me to say that they would help, and a lady from America said she would help first, and I went with her, and I gave her access to my family tree, all of my DNA hits, etc., that I had on Ancestry. That's part of the tools that you can use. You can add people so they can really kind of drill down and see what's going on. And within 2 hours, this lady had identified who my father was,
By me.
which was incredible. I mean, I don't know, I still can't work out how she managed it so quickly. Incredible. And then I had the help of a UK angel as well, because she said, well, this is who your father is. In terms of tracking him down, it'd probably be better to get a UK based angel from DNA Detectives UK, because they might have a better understanding of census records, etc. So that's what I did, and I had some help. Ultimately, we managed to discover a half brother through marriage records and that of the man that was meant to be my dad. We followed different kind of marriages and children that came off that, and I was able to reach out and speak to a lady that was the grandmother of my now half nephew, and
Yeah.
she talked about knowing this guy, gave this guy my dad's background. So that helped in my search, and I found my half brother Kevin, who's, if you've seen photos, looks
Yeah, I
just like
have.
me. It's
Yeah.
very surreal to find people that look like you having
And,
lived.
sorry, when you found him, did you contact him through and said, "Oh, I believe you're my half brother, by the way," or?
So first off, yeah, I dropped him a message just saying, I know this sounds like a weird question, but is Michael John Lloyd your father? And he kind of instantly replied and said, yeah, why, why is that? And I explained my situation, and I said that I was looking for a Michael John Lloyd, that obviously I gave a backstory that was unique to him that I'd garnered from this lady that I'd just spoken to. And he confirmed it was him. So then the next step was to kind of explain my situation and the fact that I believed that he was my father. And he sent through my mum's name and 2 photos of my mum at the time, what she would have looked like at the time, to my dad. And
Yeah.
even before seeing the photos, he just knew the name, and he instantly said what a lovely woman she was, and that he remembers her, and how sad he was to hear of her passing. So even before seeing the photos. So the juicy bit to the story is that actually my real dad, Michael, was best mates with the man that raised me. They were in the
Right,
Navy
okay.
together on the same ship. There was a group of 3 of them
Because
together.
your mum was a wren, wasn't she?
That's correct. Yep, she was a Wren. She served for a few years, 5 or 6 years. She was based at a place called HMS Collingwood, where in the 70s she met my dad, Michael.
And interestingly, where she also met Eric, I
Yeah,
believe,
yeah,
because he was a taxi driver
right.
at the time.
That's right. That's where you get all of the leading men in her life, HMS Collingwood.
Yeah.
So they were friends for several years, and I believe that Michael actually introduced Paul to Sheila. So, and then obviously they had my older half brother in 77, Mark. I'd heard that the guy that I believe was my dad was very abusive to my mum, physically and emotionally, was constantly cheating on her as well. So in late 79, it turns out that my mum had called her friend to kind of confide in her, the one that I spoke to, saying that she was unhappy and that she was being beaten, and it wasn't the first time. But at the same time, she'd also called my dad and said, I'm not having a great time at the moment, and my dad was a very kind of charismatic, funny, charming guy. So he took her out for a few times, and then their kind of relationship became intimate at that
Yeah.
point. I don't believe my mum knew that she was pregnant at the time that she decided to give things another go with the father of her firstborn. But that was her decision, which my dad respected, it turns out. And so he kind of stepped back and let them get on with it. And I believe he must have gone somewhere else in the Navy and was never in touch again. So he had no idea that I was born. It was obviously from that relationship at that time. Whether my mum just thought it was probably better to.
Why would she have known, to be fair? If you go back to then, I suppose
Yeah,
she could have worked it out potentially, but
yeah. I mean, I believe I was full term, so she would have known where she was in October of '79 when I was conceived. But it could be that she had she'd been intimate with both. She could have been around that time. I'm not sure.
we're never going to know, really, are we?
No,
So
what is kind of clear, though, is that both of them, both my mum and Paul, the man that I believe was my father, would have instantly seen from, I suppose, a young age that I was not Paul's, and I looked just like his best mate, Mike.
well, yeah, and for the wider audience, I have seen these photos on Facebook next to your photo, and yeah, a bit like me with my dad, it's a spitting image, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. So one of the, I've offered my father for him to do his DNA to prove that I am his son, but the photos are just, there's no way I couldn't be his. So we don't need to do that, which is nice. But equally, I would have understood it and supported that if he wanted to do that.
So obviously, so how does that happen then? So you speak to the half brother, and I suppose then contacts him,
Yeah,
obviously to say blah blah blah. Was he surprised? Was he?
yeah, very much surprised. Obviously, didn't know about me, so we just started emailing. That's what felt comfortable for him at that time, which I understood because this is a bolt out of the blue.
Yeah.
And we emailed, and we got very much a hell of a lot in common. So it's not just the looks that are similar; it's personalities, intellect, everything. It's very, very, very similar. Even our writing style, our sense of humour, everything, all very, very, very similar.
And obviously, you can't say that's through nurture
No, exactly.
because
That nature and nurture question is being answered in a really kind of profound way for me, because I was lucky enough to be able to catch him whilst he was over in the UK. He lives in Aquitaine in France, and he's been there just under 20 years now, I think. So he was coming across for his half brother's 60th birthday just in the new year. Whilst he was over, it was only kind of an hour and a half drive for us to meet in the place where he grew up. So for us to meet there, we've done that on the second. So I got to meet him, have a pint and some lunch, and look at photos and talk and get to know each other. And it's been brilliant in terms of, I make so much more sense now. My personality was very much different to the man I thought was my dad and my brother.
So do you think he knew, Paul? Do you think he knew that there'd been something going on with your mum and him?
Well, if he didn't know at the time, he would have definitely known me from growing up, because I've got an older half brother now called Kevin, who's 4 years older than me. We as children look identical.
Right, okay.
So I've got photos of Kevin with our dad from when he was kind of 4, 5, 6 years old, and you would again think it was me.
Yeah. So Paul would have obviously known him.
Yep.
And
So
should
he
have really, in essence,
said,
seen
"Oh,
the
yeah,
connection.
this kid looks like Mike's kid."
Yeah.
And then obviously as I've got even older, I've looked more and more like himself. So it's so obvious. It's not even like, oh, he looks a little bit like him. I'm the spitting image of him. There was no way conceivably that Paul didn't know. There's just no way.
Yeah.
I've heard that there were rumours from that side of the family, but nobody chose to tell me. And mum, for whatever
So
reason,
do you think your mum ever shared the secret, so to speak? Or do you think she just thought, I need to just zip it?
I think,
And
yeah, mum was pretty old school like that. I think she would be the kind of person that would say, let sleeping dogs lie, that kind of thing. What good could it come to now? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what her,
have you got angry at her? for not telling you, especially when you got estranged from your dad, or?
When I was estranged from my dad, there was 6 years before mum passed that
Yeah.
she could have told me in that window, I suppose, that, don't worry about being estranged from Paul because actually he's not your father. And it would have been again obvious to her that I looked exactly like Mike. There was no way that she couldn't have known.
I suppose she might have sort of, yeah, I thought, yeah, but then he's going to go and tell him, or did I? And then he's going to know what I did. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, and I'm not sure. As you know, Mum was deeply affected by her adoption and
Yeah.
her time in care, and there was parts of Mum's personality that were very much that she was still childlike in that sense.
Mm.
And she's a survivor, so she would do things to survive.
Yeah.
When I tried in myself in my mum's shoes, I think about, she was being abused allegedly physically and emotionally. She's being cheated on. She's miles away from the people that have raised her family. And she's got a young baby in Mark that was 2.5, 3 years old. So she's thinking logistically, this would be a massive headache. If he's cheating on me and being abusive to me now, what's he going to do if he finds out I've cheated on him?
Yeah.
Maybe some double standards going on there. I'm not sure. But these are, I should imagine, are some of the concerns. And even if she did confess and say it was Michael's, maybe might not have been easy to track him down, or,
Yeah.
but she wouldn't even know if he'd want any involvement. Maybe I'm not sure. But I think knowing my mum as I do, I would probably think she was just trying to survive. She was trying to do the best thing for what she felt, and that was to kind of raise us as if we were a 2.4 family, and
Yeah.
and go with that. And as many people with secrets do, it becomes harder and harder over time to be able to confess to that. And
Yeah.
she might have convinced herself that there was still an outside chance that Paul was the actual father. So maybe, but like I say, I mean,
Physically, she would have known.
she would have known. She would have
Yeah.
known. And I don't look like my brother or
No,
Paul.
you don't at all, actually. Because obviously I met him when Eric was dying, and
Yeah,
you really don't.
yeah. So it's tough, but like you say, do I have any anger towards Mum? I don't feel anger. I do feel a bit upset that I wasn't told the truth because, like you said
Mm.
originally, my whole kind of life feels like a bit of a lie up until now, finding out the truth. And I'm fortunate that my dad is still alive because he's 72
Mm.
now, and so I'm very fortunate that I've been able to actually meet him and speak to him, and we're
And build a relationship over time.
yeah, exactly. So touch wood, we're planning on visiting each other this year as well, and again with my half brother Kevin as well. We'll be catching up over the phone soon. So these are all really positive, lovely things, but I still think that the initial shock is starting to wear off.
Yeah.
Now it's about kind of processing the emotions that come with finding out that everything you were raised to believe was perhaps not right, and also it kind of answers a lot of questions about why I was treated so differently. And I think that
Mm.
that's pretty. I think my anger comes more towards the man that raised me. Oh, I say raised me. Eric was the man that raised me. The man that was in my life that I was told was my father.
Mm.
Even if he didn't work it out until, say, I don't know, I was 4 or 5 years old and I started to look like Michael's son that he knew. Even if it was until I was a teenager where he went, yeah, no, he's definitely Michael's son. He still chose actively to treat me differently.
Mm. And in terms of, so I recall, I thought probably about middle of last year, there was a couple of posts where you were very low. Was
Yes,
it because of this? Because since all of this has kicked in, sort of thing, you seem much happier. So
I'm
did
glad
it
that's
have
come
an
across. Yeah.
impact on your mental health at the time, or?
I think the stuff on my mental health is due to losses, basically.
Mm.
Mum, Eric, a really lovely young friend that I used to teach through suicide. She passed. My dog Toby. I don't have children, so like my dogs are my children. So there's been a hell of a lot of loss. I was sexually assaulted as a child. That caused PTSD.
Yeah.
which I did address with cognitive behavioral therapy 9 years ago. But all of these things kind of built up, and obviously, I've not had parents or any kind of guidance for several years, and you know what it's like when if the chips are down or what have you, and you just want somebody to listen to you. Perhaps your mum or your dad or what have you would be the person to kind of confide in, and it's been tough, and I think emotionally that's really really affected me, and resulted in me kind of suffering quite severely with depression and passive suicidal ideation. So has this affected me? Yes, it's given me a massive lift in terms of the upside from meeting my dad and building that relationship, and hopefully with my brother Kevin as well out in Norway. He lives out in Norway. And I think it helps in terms of, yes, there's a big lie that's happened, but it does answer a lot of the questions I grew up trying to work out, why was I treated so differently?
That's interesting, is that in a way, yeah, your life was a lie, but actually there was like lots of clues, really.
Yeah.
We're hidden in plain sight, so to speak.
100%. And that's the thing. It seems so obvious now, a bit like, if you're getting asked a question on the chase and somebody answers it and you couldn't quite get it, but as soon as they answered it, you went, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And how do you feel in yourself now as a result?
That there's more purpose to keep going, which is great. I've been fortunate enough to meet my half brother Kevin's mum, who sadly was the lady that my dad cheated on with my mum at the time. And I met her and her husband Phil, and they're lovely. And they've kind of welcomed me into their wider family, which is lovely. And that's quite overwhelming because, you've got every reason.
Yeah, so I've gone from being rejected in a way to like all these people like opening their arms to you.
Yeah, very much so. And they're like-minded people. And this is the warmth that I get, is the fact that I'm now connected with people that are very much like me.
No, good. So what are the next steps then?
Next steps, I suppose, to arrange to go and see my brother Kevin. I think that's the good thing. I'm in regular contact through messages with my dad, and slowly building up the relationship with those two really important new people in my life, and getting to know the wider family of them, their partners. And that's kind of where we're at the moment with it. In terms of my DNA journey, the question has come back into place of who is my mum's father. So I've got another guy called Brett, who's one of these search angels, and he's helping me try and discover that information. So finally get that question answered. Yeah, it's been a roller coaster. I've met a couple of people from my dad's side before I realized they were my dad's side. I thought they were my mum's paternal side, and one of them was a lady called Jessica Satterley, but she used to be called Jessica Garlic about 20 years ago, and she was on the live shows of Pop Idol with Will Young and Gareth Gates. That series, she was a top 10 live show contestant and toured with them, and then she represented the UK at the Eurovision in 2002 and finished third. So there's been some real kind of positive experiences through this journey, but obviously there's been a lot of kind of upheaval and questions and emotions.
And I think one of the things that I read on one of your posts is that it's actually, is it 20 or 25% of the people who do a DNA test find out that actually their dad's not their dad?
I think it's
quite a few, isn't it?
It's 1 in 50. 1 in 50 people that submit their DNA find out their dad's not their dad. And I still think that's a staggeringly high amount, because that's the one thing is what I was going to say was to any kind of people listening that are thinking about doing a DNA journey, by all means, I'm not trying to put you off by my story, but really do consider the fact that DNA does not care about family secrets or whether you're going to find something really positive or negative. It just tells you facts. It deals in facts alone. And unfortunately, there's a lot of buried, for decades and decades and decades, there's a lot of family secrets that are being found out and dug up. It could be really positive. There might be something that's quite shocking, like what happened.
It's disturbing, though, regardless. I mean, you take your case, because of a situation with the person you thought was your dad, blah, blah, blah. It couldn't be more positive, but you found your real dad who's not dead and all the rest of it. But yeah, for someone who, I don't know, it can have devastating effects, and just
Yeah,
in yourself,
and that's the risk, and that's what I'll say. There is an element of risk, so really consider it before doing it, and just be open that you might hear things or find out or discover things that perhaps you weren't expecting. So make sure that if you're doing it, that you've got good support around you, because it is emotional. This is part of
Mm.
your identity, I suppose, and who you believe you are. And this could alter that, but it could alter that in a really, really dramatically positive way as well. And there's a lot of success stories where people have discovered long lost family members and been reunited, and it's an incredible thing, and it is great, but just make sure it's considered. That's what I would say.
Brett, thank you for sharing your story. It was
No worries.
really interesting. And yeah, I'm sure that everybody will probably go and buy a DNA test. Thank you so much. For everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, and more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.